What's up, guys? How do you like the shirt? Hey, welcome back to the next video. In the last video, we talked about the development environment that I'm using currently with the Sparta-DOS X cartridge and the Mac 65 cartridge, along with the FujiNet device for my disk drives. Well, today I'm going to show you another solution that I've tested, and this is currently using the Side 2 cartridge. I don't know if you guys can get a good visual of that, but this is basically a cartridge-based solution that gives you hard drive functionality, not true PBI hard drive functionality, but hard drive functionality using, let's see if I can get this, the compact flash card technology. Okay, I've got a 4 GB flash card here. And this cartridge allows you to place these flash cards into the slot that's built into the top. And what you can do with this cartridge is you can format the flash card in what's called the Atari partition type. Now, let me give you a little background on this cartridge. Okay, this cartridge is developed by a gentleman in Poland named Lotharic. I hope I'm saying that right. I'll provide links in the description if you'd like to buy one for yourself. But the Side 2 interface provides hard disk functionality via a software driver. Okay, it's not a true parallel bus interface like my IDE, like the My IDE device provides, but it basically uses a patched version of Sparta-DOS X with a software driver that allows you to use this compact flash card as a hard drive. Okay, so that's pretty cool. You can set up drives D1 through D8, just like we did with the FujiNet, for example, or the, what's the other, SIO to SD solutions that are out there. But the description says, and I'm going to read it directly from the description I downloaded, it's packaged in a compact cartridge design. And by the way, the cartridge is not 3D printed. It's actually molded by a professional factory, and it's really, really professionally made. I mean, the quality is really, really nice on it. So anyway, using the special side build of the Sparta-DOS X, you can enjoy the many benefits of a hard disk interface on the Atari by simply plugging in the cartridge and turning on the machine. The side driver for Sparta-DOS X is loaded directly from the Sparta-DOS X's cartridge device at boot up, and I'll show you how that works. And you've got all the necessary Sparta-DOS X tools. You've got F-Disk, which is used for partitioning the compact flash cards. One note about the F-Disk tool, though, is you need at least 128K of RAM. So you're going to need a 130XE or an 800 or 600 XL with upgraded memory. Just keep that in mind. There's a partition info utility, and there's a mount utility for dynamic partitioning and mounting. It uses, like I said, the Atari partition table scheme devised by Konrad Kokoskiewicz. I hope I said that right. And basically, it allows the storage media to be easily shared with other compliant interfaces. For example, the My IDE, Sparta-DOS X, Incognito, the Ultimate 1 MB PBI, and the IDE Plus 2.0. So anyway, in a nutshell, this cartridge gives you a hard disk, has built-in Sparta-DOS, and as an additional bonus, it has a real-time clock. Now, in the last video, I talked about the Sparta-DOS X cartridge that I use with the Mac 65. I'm going to show you a way to use this cartridge to accomplish the same goals or the same functionality that we did with the Sparta-DOS X cartridge and the Mac 65 cartridge. The way we can do that is there's a custom build of Sparta-DOS X. You can actually flash this cartridge. And I'll provide links where you get the files to flash this cartridge. But you could flash this cartridge with a custom version of Sparta-DOS X, which supports the driver for partitioning the compact flash card as a hard drive. It also has the ability to load and emulate ROMs such as Atari Basic, Basic XL, Basic XE, Action, the Action Programming Language cartridge from OSS, and of course, Mac 65. The way that works is there's a utility that comes with this cartridge. You can download it. It's called side configuration or side cfg.xex. It's an executable that allows you to choose which ROM alongside Sparta-DOS X you want to run when you boot the cartridge. And let's take a look at this cartridge right now. I'll show you how we do this. All right, here we go. We're at the Atari computer. We've got our cartridge plugged in, our Side 2 cartridge. Let's go ahead and boot up and see what happens. So when you first boot the cartridge, we get the ultimate clock installed. We've got the side driver installed. And you can see that it detected this SanDisk 4 gigabyte card that I have in there. Now you also see under the SanDisk the SanDisk card that I've got two partitions, B and C. I currently have this card partitioned and set up right now, so I'm going to show you how mine is set up first and how it works, and then we'll go back with a fresh compact flash card that I have, and I'll show you how I created the partitions. So right away, we can see D1 is not installed, and I do that on purpose. I leave D1 open because I want to be able to use my FujiNet to boot specific things or access certain utilities. So on this compact flash card, I've got two drives set up, and that's D2. If we can see here, this volume name is ASM, and this is where I have my assembly language source code, and I've got D3. This is where I've got my basic source code programs. Now, if you go back and look at the prior video, you'll see that I have a similar setup with the FujiNet. So what I did with this one is I kind of copied everything over as far as, drive 2 and drive 3. So I've got my assembly language on drive 2 and my basic programs on drive 3. So it kind of mirrors what I did on the FujiNet. But in any event, so right now I've got this cartridge set up when I boot into it for Sparta-DOS. Now, one thing I wanted to show you, the cartridge has a switch right here on the front, okay? Up means that it boots to the side menu. So let's go ahead and look at that first. Because this cartridge does have a built-in menu system, a built-in program, a BIOS if you will, that when the switch is up, it will boot into that. Oh, I take that back. It boots to the cartridge. Okay, so one step I missed. Before we can actually boot into the side menu, we have to select. Remember I told you this cartridge supports multiple custom ROMs that you can actually boot into? Well, right now I've got it set up for Mac 65. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the computer off. I'm going to go back to Sparta-DOS by switching the switch down on the side cartridge so that I can get to the utility where I can do that. So I've got that utility set up on drive 2, and it is called side configuration.xex. Okay, so you can see here we've got several items on the menu here that we can choose from, and this is the boot mode, if you will, that the cartridge is going to come into. So number one is the side loader. That's the one I want to show you, which actually has the built-in menu system for the cartridge. Number two is Mac 65. This is where I told you we could run a Mac 65 cartridge at boot up. Number three would be Action. Number four would be Basic XL. Number five would be Basic XE. And then we've obviously got the ability to drop down to DOS or reboot. So I'm going to choose Side Loader. And you can see the changes are saved. Now let's go ahead and reboot. Now the switch is down, so it went to Sparta-DOS. But if I type car, this is actually where it goes into our side loader. Okay, so this side loader utility was written by Flash Jazz Cat, Jonathan Holliday. For you guys who know who he is, you can watch his videos on YouTube. He's a Atari genius in my opinion. But this menu system here he wrote, and this is a firmware that you can have loaded on your Side 2 cart. And basically it detects devices, it shows you partitions. If you actually have a flash card that's formatted in FAT32, you can load COM files and XEX files and games, whatever. You can launch them from here. This shows you your drives that are available. You can unmount and swap ATR disks. You can refresh the disks. You can turn basic on and off on the cartridge, and some other things. But these are things we'll get into later on when we're talking about the actual side loader ROM itself. So let's go ahead and turn the computer off. Let's put the switch in the down mode, which it already is. Let's go back into Sparta-DOS. Remember, the switch down takes you into Sparta-DOS, the built-in Sparta-DOS. If the switch is up, it goes right to the cartridge. So let's go ahead and run the side configuration utility again. And that's on drive 2, my bad. Let's go ahead and set it up for Mac 65. Let's reboot. And this is how I'm primarily using the cartridge these days for my Mac 65 development. All right, so we can type car. And there we are. We're on our Mac 65 cartridge. Now, we don't have a physical cartridge, obviously, but we have the ROM loaded because of the functionality of the side 2. So let's go ahead and load up some source code like we always do. And you can see you don't hear any SIO activity because we're not going through the SIO. We're using the custom software driver that was built for the Side 2 to emulate the hard drive capability using the compact flash card. So here's our source code. Now, one thing you got to be careful of when you're using Sparta-DOS is where you put your programs in memory. I found that out the other day. Sparta-DOS X likes to swap out using memory 5000 through 7FFF. So you need to avoid that area when you're using Sparta-DOS X for your programs. So I'm just going to make this program run at 3000. I'm going to comment out this line. Let's go ahead and assemble. Let's go into our debugger. Let's execute the code. And why did it not execute? Oh, that's because I put it at 3000. Sorry. Okay, there we go. There's our little DLI routine. Okay, source code is still there. Let's go back to DOS. Now, this disk error while saving memory, I'm going to show you how to correct that. So anyway, we're back to DOS, and there we go. So using this cartridge solution, we've got Sparta-DOS X, we've got hard drive emulation, and we've got loading and saving, and we can actually emulate different cartridges. So let's do something different here. Let's set the configuration to basic XE. And let's reboot. And look at that, we've got basic XE. Interesting. Load up one of our old programs. Let's see, which one? We haven't discussed this program, but I'm going to be making a video shortly about how this works. Let's see, what did I call that program? Okay, FireWRX. And why did that not know? Because I'm not using Mac 65. We need quotations in DOS. Okay. Now you notice how in basic XE it proper capitalizes the code. So that's one of the nice things. It does auto indentation for next loops. So this is a program we'll get into at a later date, but I just wanted to show you that I'm in basic XE now. So the power of the Side 2 cart is really nice as far as being able to emulate programming cartridges, have Sparta-DOS X, have a real-time date and time clock, and be able to operate as a hard drive. So, I mean, you know, is it a true PBI device in the sense of using the PBI device? No, but it's still very powerful. All right, so let's go ahead and boot back into Sparta-DOS. And I'm going to show you the fdisk utility right now. So let's type fdisk. And this is the fdisk version 4.85 that I have here, the Atari Partition Table Partition Editor. Copyright 2010-2020 by Flash Jazz Cat, aka Jonathan Holliday. And there's his website right there if you want to go read more about this. But in any event, let's go ahead and hit escape and let's go up to the menu and let's open our disk, and you can see there's our SanDisk 4 gig. And you can see right here that this is our partition table editor, and as you can see right here, I've got two partitions. The first one is 2,000 sectors roughly, and it's set up as drive 2 with 256 bytes per sector. And then I've got the second partition here, which is drive 3, again 2,000 roughly sectors at 256 bits per sector or bytes per sector. So if we wanted to create another partition, let's say we wanted to create a drive 4, we go up to the menu and we hit partition and we go insert, and operation may invalidate data in higher DOS partitions. Okay, actually I don't want to do that. What I want to do is I want to arrow down to the empty slot and then do an insert. Okay, so we're going to do 2,000 sectors, hit enter. Okay, let's go back up to the menu. Every time you want to change one of these parameters, you have to go back up to the menu. So let's do the bytes per sector. Wrong one. Let's make it 256. And let's go back up and assign the drive. We're going to set D4. And that's pretty much going to now create me a new partition, drive 4. So we hit escape. We go back to the partition table. We write it. Yes. Okay, that's updated. And now we can exit. Yes. Okay. So if we go to our new drive 4, we try and type a directory, of course it's going to fail because we have to format it. So that's where our format command comes in Sparta DOS X. Now, unit numbers here, this is going to be unit number 4, which in Sparta DOS terms is drive D. And all of these parameters, when you're using a hard drive, are not valid. All we have to do is use the B build directory function, okay? Because this is actually not a physical disk. So we build, it says directory is about to be cleared. You hit yes. Caution again, destroys all data. You hit yes. And that's that. We escape out of that, and now when we type directory of D4, we've got our new partition. And we can just as easily now copy from D2, everything, to D4, everything, and there it goes. And you can see how fast it is. This is not SIO driven. This is actually driven through the cartridge port, which is direct memory access. So it's going to be a little quicker than SIO, obviously. And it's silent as well. There's no SIO activity. And there we go. Now we can change the volume of this drive with our change volume. Whatever, call it data. Now our volume name is data. Okay? So that's how easy it is to set new partitions on the actual compact flash disks. All right? What else can we talk about? So being that we're loading from Sparta DOS, we can get a directory of the cartridge contents. And you can see the directory. When you type car:, you're actually getting the directory of the cartridge. And you can see here most of the Sparta DOS commands that are not memory resident. For example, the append command, the menu command, the car command, the change dir, check disk, change time and date. You know, all the stuff that you would normally expect in Sparta DOS is built into the cartridge. Okay, so we don't even need the Sparta DOS tools kit disk that I showed you in the last video with the FujiNet. It's all built into the cartridge right here. All right. So there we go. So we've got our cartridge, we've got our development environment. By the way, let's go back to D2. I just wanted to show you one more configuration that we have here. Let's do action and reboot. Now keep in mind, guys, all I'm using right now is the cartridge. I don't have any disk drives. I don't have any SIO devices connected whatsoever. And there's action. It's beautiful. So again, with this single cartridge, we've got a hard drive. We've got a programming environment and one of many cartridges. We've got BASIC, we've got Sparta DOS, we've got a real-time clock. We've got everything we need to develop for the Atari computer. So is it worth the money? In my opinion, Absolutely. I would say that the ultimate setup would be to have the side 2 and the FujiNet, and those two in tandem, you've got everything you need for your Atari. Um, if you want to buy the side 2, look in the description. I've got the link there for you. If you have any questions about how to, or if you'd like to see me create a video on how to flash this guy, flash the different versions of Spartados on there, or get more depth into the technical how-tos of this cartridge, let me know in the comments and I'll create another video. But I think I'm going to be going back to programming in the next several videos. We're going to be doing some basic and getting into the assembly language again, so I hope you guys are looking forward to that. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and subscribe. Hit the like button for the video. I'd like to get some more people involved, and hope you guys enjoyed this. I will see you in the next video. Take care. Hey, what's up, guys? We got the Spartados in. That's right, Spartados X. I think this is actually version 4.19 if I'm not mistaken. So anyway, this is what we were talking about in the earlier video. It says here, supports, if you guys can read that or not, supports high speed at full capacities on the Indus GT 180K and the Atari XF 551 360K. We don't have either one of those drives. We have the Atari 1050. I don't know if that's in view where you guys can see it, but we have the Atari 1050 with the US doubler chip inside of it. So that's what we're going to be using today for demonstration purposes. And I ordered some floppies. I got 50 some odd floppies for 50 bucks from floppydisk.com. So we're going to actually format a couple of those today, and let's go ahead and open the Spartados and see what we get here. So we got the manual, Spartados X. Looks like Spartados 10, doesn't it, with that X there? Got the full manual. Got a fold out here. What does this say here? ICD Incorporated 1220. Rock Street, Rockford, Illinois 61101. So a little piece of history right there. ICD Incorporated. Product warranty. Here we go. We got some changes in here to some of the commands that were, this looks like some kind of addendum to the manual. So we'll take a look at that after. Kind of cool. It says here, Spartados X, the most powerful 8-bit disk operating system. I guess we're going to find out. Is that focusing? Okay. So anyway, this is actually a cartridge, guys, which I think is kind of cool. See that? Focused. Spartados X. And what's nice is this goes into the cartridge port of the Atari, and then they've got a little pass-through port up at the top of their cartridge where you can then plug in your cartridge, whatever cartridge, like for example, we've been using the editor assembler, so that editor assembler will plug into the top of the Spartados cartridge, and then the Spartados cartridge will then in turn go into the cartridge port of the Atari. So it kind of looks like that. All right. So anyway, here we go. We got the cartridge. You know, what's nice about having it on the cartridge too is that you just turn the computer on. You don't have to worry about waiting times for the disk to load up or the disk to go bad or trying to find the disk. Your DOS is always there and ready to go. You don't see very many of these. I don't think I've actually seen very many of these Spartados or any type of DOS on a cartridge. You don't see that very often. So I'm glad to have it. I'm glad I found it. And let's go ahead and hook the Atari up and use this a little bit and see what we have. So I'm going to go ahead and pop this cartridge in. I'm also going to have the assembler editor cartridge plugged in because we're going to do a little testing with that as well. So let me readjust the camera so you guys can see what I'm doing here. Okay, so let's go ahead and fire up the computer and let's see what we get when we first turn on the Sparta DOS. There we go, Sparta DOS X 4.2.0. Very cool. So what's nice about Sparta DOS, I was kind of looking through the manual a little bit here, is that if you're familiar with DOS, the disk operating system for Microsoft, the learning curve on this is going to be pretty quick, pretty short. Okay, a lot of the commands that Sparta DOS uses are the same commands that you'll see in MS-DOS. So for example, to get, well actually, you know what, before we do anything, let's take a disk and let's put it in the drive and let's format it. All right, so I'm going to take a brand new unused disk here. Okay, I'm going to put it inside the Atari 1050 drive, close the door, and we're going to type format. Okay, now most of the stuff you do in Sparta DOS is done at the command line. There is a menu-driven system, which I'll show you after, but for right now, let's go ahead and just use the format command. And you can see it takes us to a menu that says ICD disk formatter. And let me just make sure that you guys can see this. Make sure you can see what I see. Okay. So we've got here the unit number. I've only got one drive, so I'm going to use drive 1. You can hit V for volume name. We're going to call this test. Press enter. Now here's where the ICD doubler shines, and you can see here where it says skew, and right now it's set to high speed. If you hit S, it'll go to standard, so you can switch between high speed and standard. We're going to do high speed, obviously. We want to get some speed out of this. Density here, you can do double, single, or dual. Okay. Now let's talk about that real quick because I want to make sure that we understand what the difference is between those three options. So let me see if I can find the format command in the manual. I want to make sure that I do this correctly. So here we go. Okay, so density. All right. Maybe one of three types used with the Atari 8-bit computers. Single, 128 bytes per sector, dual, 128 bytes per sector, or double, 256 bytes per sector. Now the Atari 810s only support single density. The stock Atari 1050s support single and dual. Atari 1050s with the US doubler, which we have, or the Atari XF551s and the Indus GTs support all three densities. So we can do all three. So we're going to do double, and the mode is going to be either Atari or Sparta. So we're going to do Sparta. Number of tracks, we can do, let's read about tracks. Tracks can be 40 single-sided, 40 double-sided, 77 single-sided, 77 double-sided, 80 single-sided, and 80 double-sided. Well, that's a lot. So SS, obviously single-sided, it's one head writes on one side of the disk. Now I can tell you all Atari brand drives are going to use the 40 single-sided except for the XF551, which it's capable of 40 tracks dual-sided. So we're going to go ahead and choose 40 tracks single-sided since our 1050 drive is only a single-sided drive.
What's up, guys? As you all know, I'm a die-hard 80s retro bit kind of guy. So today I wanted to show you an Atari-like joystick replica called the Trooper Premium Controller from Hyperkin. It's an ambidextrous 2-button design that gives both left and right-handed players the fire button accessibility they need. So stick around and let's see how well this thing is built and how good it functions. So let's take a quick peek inside and see what this thing is made of. 4 screws on the underside will allow you to separate the 2 halves and get to the internal components. What we have inside is a rubber membrane, typical of most game pads. Very simple construction, yet pretty sturdy. There's a pretty good weight to the joystick, and I figured out pretty quickly after I removed the bottom PCB board that there's a couple weights that they have screwed into the bottom. And that actually gives the joystick a nice feel to it. Doesn't feel as light and plasticky and cheap. The other nice feature about this joystick is it has just over 9 feet, or actually I think it's more closer to 10 feet of cable, which guarantees that you're not going to run out of space when using this to connect up to any of your game consoles. And I mean, I like the look and feel of the joystick overall. It's got a nice retro classic look to it with the wood grain. Very Atari-like. It's got the 2 buttons left and right for left-handed or right-handed players, which is also kind of nice. And the 2 front beveled edges makes it very comfortable in your hand when you're holding it and getting on your gameplay. Just for a quick comparison, here I have it sitting next to my Starfighter Ultimate joystick and the Monster joystick that I had built recently. If you want to learn more about that Monster joystick, I'll put a link in the video in the description for you to take a look at that as well. So I mean, to be honest guys, I like the joystick a lot. I mean, it responds very well to your movement, and it's comfortable in the hand, and it's lightweight. And I mean, listen, for 13 bucks you can pick this joystick up on Amazon right now, and I mean, for that type of money, it's definitely a winner in my books. I mean, I don't have any complaints with it. The button responds, pretty well. The left, right, up, down, triggering of the gamepad little membrane works pretty well. I mean, I just didn't really miss, much movement at all, or have any negative side effects when using the joystick. So I'd say, for the money, I would pick up, a couple more of these and have them for gameplay with the family or the friends. I mean, you just can't go wrong with that kind of money, and like I said, it's built pretty well. So I'm going to give this one a thumbs up, and I highly recommend that anybody who wants a good joystick for cheap, they pick this guy up, and I'll have a link in the description where you can download it on Amazon as well. So that's all I got for you today, guys. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, give me a likes up on the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Go Atari. So I was sent an Atari 130XE by Anthony Ferraro. This is his personal 130XE. He's also the YouTube subscriber that donated the 800XL to the channel that we made the last video about. And he described to me this particular computer having some memory issues. It's failing the memory test during the self-test. So I thought we'd take a look at it for him and make some repairs on it, and at the same time take a look at the 130XE, its history, and some of the nuances about it, and that's what we're going to do. So hang tight. I think you're going to like this video as well. The Atari 130XE is the successor to the most popular Atari selling 8-bit line of computers, which was the 800XL, along with the 600XL and also the 1200XL. Famous Atari owner and CEO Jack Tramiel left Commodore in January 1984, and he was looking to re-enter the market when he purchased the Atari Consumer Division in July 1984 from Warner for an extremely low price. When Tramiel took over, the high-end XL models were canceled, and the low-end XLs were redesigned into the XE series. Now, nearly all of Atari's research, design, and prototype projects were canceled, as is often the nature with new management that are ignorant of the nature of the current projects. This included the Amiga-based 1850 XLD system and other existing 68,000 prototypes, while Tramiel focused on developing the 68,000 based Atari ST system and also while bringing in ex-Commodore engineers to work on the ST line. You can see that the Atari ST line of computers has a very similar design, almost exact design, as the 130XC. The only difference is the 130XC doesn't have the numerical keyboard next to it, along with the arrow keys separated. It was introduced at the Consumer Electronics Show Winter 1985. And ironically, it was released at the same time as the Atari 520 ST, Atari's introduction into the 16-bit line of processors. The 130XC has the same characteristics as the 800XL, except its added memory. It's got 128K of memory instead of the 64K that came on the 800XL. The extended memory can be used as a RAM disk, or it can be accessed by bank switching routines. It basically was an attempt to extend the life of the old and aging XL series. Along with the additional memory, it featured an enhanced cartridge interface, which we'll look at a second, and of course a modern, sleek design, very similar to the Atari ST line of computers that would eventually replace it. Along with the new 130XE, Atari introduced the XF551 5¼ floppy disk drive with DOS 2.5. Now this disk drive was a true double-density, double-sided 5¼ floppy and supported several extended modes for storing extra data on the 5¼ floppy disk. It should also be noted that Sparta DOS, written by ICD, also supports the double-sided, double-density, and enhanced density formats of the XF551. Atari also released an updated cassette recorder, the XC12, with the same stylish look and feel of the new XE series computers. Several other XE machines were also produced at the same time, including the Atari 65XE, which for all intents and purposes is exactly like the 800XL, except it doesn't have a rear parallel connector, which, if you think about it, somewhat limits its expansion capabilities. The Enhanced Cartridge Interface, or ECI, was a modified version of the PBI design, or Parallel Bus Interface, formerly on the 800XL computer. Many of the pins on the PBI were duplicated onto the 30-pin cartridge slot of the 130XE, so the ECI was limited to only those 14 pins in the PBI that were not in the cartridge slot. In 1987, Atari released the Atari ZEGS, or XE game system. Basically, the system was a repackaged Atari 65XE without an extended cartridge interface. With the keyboard, the first and only detachable keyboard for the 8-bit line of computers, was not attached to the system, would come up with Missile Command, which was built into the ROM. When the keyboard was attached, the system would come up with Atari Basic. The system was packaged with console, joystick, light gun, and several software packages, and originally sold for $199. Let's go ahead and take a look at some more demonstrations of what the Atari 8-bit line of computers can do, and also the 130XE with its extended memory. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit about the 130XE's history and some of what it can do, let's take a look at this 130XE and see if we can figure out what's going on with the memory errors. We'll go ahead and unbox it. Let's get it into the self-test mode and see what kind of memory errors we're getting using the self-test mode. Now this machine is pretty yellowed on the top side of it, but that's okay. That's what happens when these old machines are exposed to the elements over 30 years or so. And here you can see a picture of the 130XE compared to my 130XE and just how bad the yellowing is done to it. But this can be corrected with a retro writing process, you know, once the computer is repaired. So let's go ahead and turn the 130XE on, and the first thing you'll notice as soon as I turn it on is it goes right to the memory self-test. That is a clear indication that there is one or more of the RAM ICs that are bad, and we'll go ahead and let the memory test run to see how many blocks of the RAM are actually bad. And we can already see some red squares, so that's going to tell us that we've got some bad banks. Now, we can't tell exactly which ICs are bad by this test. It just tells us that there are some bad banks of memory. So unfortunately, what we have to do is we're going to have to take the computer apart and we're going to have to figure out which one of the memory ICs is actually bad, or if more than one of them are bad, which is completely possible. Now, to get into the 130XE, we've got to turn it over and remove 4 Phillips head screws from the back, which will allow us to separate the top and bottom and have access to the keyboard connector. Now, once we have the top and bottom separated, the keyboard is basically just connected by a ribbon cable, which you can very carefully just pull straight out. Now, there are 6 screws that are holding the main board to the bottom of the case, and there's also the RF shielding that we're going to have to remove to access the top of the board. Once the 6 screws are removed, the RF shield is basically just held in place with a couple of bent tangs or tabs, if you will. And on this particular 130XE, it doesn't look like it looks like this RF shield has been removed before, because by looking at those tangs, they're already bent straight, which allows me to just basically pull the RF shield straight off without any obstruction. And here we have the main board isolated by itself, and you can see the 16 memory ICs there on the right hand side in the 2 columns. And actually, by looking at the manufacturers, it looks like this particular IC has already been replaced, as it doesn't match the other 17, or I'm sorry, the other 15 that are there. This looks like an NEC D4164C, which is compatible, but it's definitely not the same as the MT4264s that are else on the board. So that would lead me to believe that that IC has already gone bad and been replaced, which would explain why the RF shield came out so easily, because somebody's already been into this computer in the past, you know, outside of the factory. Now remember, back when our test was run, I counted we have 14 red squares. So keep that in mind as we start to troubleshoot the memory chips and replace them once we make an improvement. So right now we've got 14 red squares, and we're going to move on to the procedure that I'm going to show you now on how to troubleshoot and find the bad memory chips. So here we have the 130XE motherboard, and we've got 16 DRAM chips that we're going to actually start to look at in the 2 rows of 8. Now, this procedure involves having some spare memory chips. I happen to have a compatible Samsung IC here. It's a KM4164B, and what you can do is you take these new ICs or DRAM chips and you want to bend the pins in a little bit so they've got some tension to them. And what we're going to do is we're going to just piggyback without soldering this replacement IC on top of the ICs one at a time, just by pushing down on it and letting the legs have tension on the original IC, and that will in effect become the new IC without actually having to remove the old one, if that makes sense. So one at a time, we're going to take this new IC and we're going to position it on top of the questionable IC, and we're going to turn the computer on and see if we get any results. Now, as a little side note, I have already laid the IC on the first chip and it didn't make any changes, but I placed it on the second one, and as you can see, the computer went into basic, which means we made an improvement. Now, I don't know how much of an improvement this one IC is going to make, but we're going to go ahead and let the RAM test run fully and see either if we get all green bars or if we get a reduced number of red bars. My suspicion is going to be we probably improved it to some degree, but I won't know until this RAM test finishes if this is the only bad IC. So let's see what happens. Well, we went from 14 to 6 red squares, so we definitely made an improvement. So now we're just going to continue the process and start to piggyback some of the other ICs and see if we can either eliminate these altogether and get ourselves back with a full positive RAM check. This is a little bit of a closer up view as to what the piggyback IC looks like as you place it on top of each DRAM. You can see that the legs have just enough tension to make contact, but we're obviously not having to solder them or make any permanent connections while we run the tests. So this is a pretty ingenious way to actually test the RAM chips without actually having to desolder 16 chips. Now, I went through and did this method on all 16 ICs, and I really didn't see any change in the memory, so I decided that in order to really find out what was going on, I would go ahead and pull the first IC that actually made a difference, which was the second one down in the line from the upper left-hand corner. I decided to go ahead and remove that RAM chip and put in a 16-pin socket. Obviously, anytime you're going to be taking chips off any of these old boards, it's a good idea to go ahead and put a socket in so that in future repairs or upgrades, you don't have to worry about desoldering. These boards are notoriously fragile, especially the 130XEs. The tracings have a bad reputation of tearing and ripping, so it's a good idea to put a socket if you're going to go ahead and do any desoldering. Now, one thing I didn't capture on video, which I should have, is when I started to desolder this IC, the solder wasn't coming out very well. This is, 20, 30-year-old solder, so what I actually had to do off camera was with a pencil retouch all the solder joints with fresh solder, and then that made the desoldering process go a lot smoother. So keep that in mind too when you're working on old electronics. Sometimes it's good to add a little new solder before you try and remove the old solder. Also, after you're done desoldering, do a little cleanup and make sure all the joints have been cleanly desoldered. And then what I always like to do is go with my fingernail and push the pins back and forth. That'll loosen up any remaining little residue of solder that's in there that might hold the IC in there and prevent it from coming out, and thus also ripping a tracing on the board, which is something you don't want to deal with. Now take your time in removing any components from the board. This is a pretty brutal way that I'm working with here at knife, but it does have the right tip that I'm looking for. But if you're doing any prying like I'm doing here, make sure you don't damage the components that are next to the IC. Do very light pressure. You don't want to damage any more components than you have to. So I'm just using a very light pressure here on the corner pin and just working my way back and forth little by little until it finally comes loose. Now when it comes to fitting the socket, again, take your time. Don't apply too much pressure. These pins are very delicate. The sockets themselves are very delicate. You can already see one pin is bent as I try and put it in the first time. So just take your time. You know, don't force it. Let it go in at its own pace. And then when you get to the desoldering side, you want to do the same thing. Just take your time, do one pin at a time. Make sure you make a good solder joint, and be careful not to damage any of the tracings. Always clean up your joints. Make sure it's cleanly soldered. You don't have any dangling solder particles hanging around that could cause a short. And there we have it. We have our new socket right on the board, ready to insert the new memory IC in. All right, time to go ahead and put our new memory IC in and see what kind of results we get. It's going to be interesting to see if we get the same bad memory blocks or if we made some progress by actually replacing the IC. I have a sneaky suspicion that replacing this IC is going to do a much better job than just letting it ride on top of the old one. Well, apparently our soldering skills are up to par because we're at least at the ready sign. So I'm going to go ahead and connect this keyboard properly, and then we're going to go ahead and run that memory test again. I'll speed it up for you guys and we'll let it do the entire memory bank and see what we have. Well, that looks like a success to me. Well, that just goes to show you that the piggyback method for testing the memory can point you in the right direction, but it doesn't always give you the absolute result you're looking for. So I would suggest if you're using this method on your own, as soon as you see a change in any of the memory testing for whatever machine you're working on, go ahead and replace that IC and then continue your testing. Because obviously doing the piggyback method, there's still some errors you could get based on the fact that that bad chip is still part of the circuit, even though you have a good chip on top of it. So anyway, you guys get to watch me put the 130XE back together. So let's go ahead and give it a final test, make sure that everything works by playing some Donkey Kong. I hope you guys liked the video. If you do, give me some comments. If there's some questions you have about what I did to the 130XE, go ahead and leave them in the comments. Go ahead and like, subscribe, and I've got some other stuff coming up here shortly. Some more assembly language programming videos and the such. So anyway, I recommend everybody get out there and restore some retro hardware. It's really fun to do, and we got to keep these machines going. So until the next video, take care, everybody. Go Atari. Hey guys, thanks for watching. So in this video, we're going to look at player missile graphics on the Atari 8-bit computer in BASIC. We're going to actually construct a spaceship, and we're going to move it around on the screen, and we're going to change the color, and we're going to learn about all the things that are necessary to set up the player missile graphics registers in BASIC and actually create a basic ship, like I said, and move it around. So this is going to be getting into the meat and potatoes of doing animation on the Atari 8-bit computer using the player missile graphics system. Now the player missile graphics on the Atari are very powerful. When the Atari first came out with this technology, there really wasn't another computer around that could compete with it as far as the ease of use of moving sprites around on the screen, and getting the animation done with very few lines of code. Basically, you're given 4 sprites, or what is known as players in the Atari world. These 4 sprites can have colors that are completely independent of what's going on in the background or the playfield. So you get an additional set of colors, if you will, when using the players. Now you get four players and you get 4 missiles. The players are 8 bits wide by 256 bytes high. So you can have a player that's the height of the screen, 8 bits wide. The missiles are 2 bits wide, and the reason why you have player missiles is because in the old days when you had Space Invaders, it was players and missiles, so they kind of coined the name player missiles, so you could have players and then the players shoot missiles. That's where the name came from anyway. So like I said, on the Atari, the player missile system was developed. It's very easy to use, it's very powerful. And we're going to take a look at it today in BASIC and how to get it started. And then as we get more involved in the player missile graphics in the next set of videos, what I'd like to do is work up to creating a game, a full-fledged game that we write in BASIC. And we're going to see the pros and cons of that, of writing the game in BASIC. We might actually do some of the parts of the game in assembly language and then use that code in the BASIC for speed. Maybe moving the player up and down on the screen and controlling the firing sequences. But once we get all that taken care of and we got a full-fledged game, what I'd like to do is take that basic game and port it to assembly language. And that'll be the holy grail for us, because now we'll have a game that we've prototyped pretty much in BASIC and worked all the kinks out of it. And now we can port it to assembly language and have full speed and full power and rocking and rolling, and it's going to be really exciting, guys. So before we get into the code, let's take a brief look at the history of player missile graphics and how it's controlled in memory, how we set up the memory. And don't worry if you can't follow along with every bit of it, as we talk about it. Once we get into the code and we start going line by line, I'm going to describe to you what each function in the player missile graphics system does. And once you start working with it, it'll all become clear, and it'll be very easy to understand. So let's take a look at player missile graphics and how they work, and then we'll get into the code. So what exactly are player missile graphics in the Atari computer? It's a system designed by the engineers to allow the movement of sprites easily around the screen, independently of other objects that are on the screen and independent of the graphics mode that you're in. The sprites can take on colors of their own, they can be moved independently, and the system can also tell you or detect collisions between the sprites. You also are given 4 missiles. The 4 missiles are also 4 other objects that can be moved independently of the players. They're limited to 2 bits in width, but they can be combined to make a 5th player. So with this powerful technology at your fingertips, it makes it really easy to create games and animation on the Atari computer using minimal overhead of the CPU and minimal lines of code. You're probably familiar with this game, Donkey Kong. It was very popular back in the 80s. Well, guess what? Mario, along with the barrels and the fireballs that appear, are all part of the player missile graphics subsystem. They're being animated using player missile graphics, and when Mario gets struck by a barrel, that's called a collision. Pac-Man is another popular game that you've probably played, and you can see the same type of movement here with the ghosts, which are probably players, and the Pac-Man, which is probably the missiles, all four missiles combined together to make the Pac-Man. Now, I'm not 100% sure of that, but in theory, that could be put together that way to make this game happen. So again, player missile graphics are everywhere in the games that we play and the programs that we use. In this diagram, we can see a simple player as a vertical film strip, if you will, along a particular horizontal position. So that 8 bits wide, 256 lines tall, can all be filled in or left blank for your player. So picture your players as a vertical strip moving across the screen horizontally, and the bitmap data within that strip being moved in memory as the player moves up and down. In this very basic example, you can see one player, which has all of its data filled in, 255, being moved across the screen backwards and forwards. In the next example, we have the same player, except instead of having all of its bitmap data filled in from top to bottom, we only have the middle section shaped as a spaceship. If you think of the Atari's memory map, you have top of memory. You typically have your character set, Screen Antic 5, display list, and so on. Sort of this similar stack of programs and data within the memory. We're going to position the player missile graphics in the upper 2K of the top of memory. And there's a way to do that in code, which I will show you in BASIC. It basically involves getting the top of the memory using peak 106 and then calculating 2K backwards and setting that new top of memory 2K below that and allocating that area for our player missile graphics objects. The other thing to understand when it comes to player missile graphics is there's two modes of resolution: double line resolution and single line resolution. Without getting too in-depth in discussion about it now, just remember that double line resolution requires less memory, but it's also taking up 2 lines for every pixel on the screen, whereas single resolution takes more memory, but it only uses a single line per pixel. What that means is the single line resolution is more detailed, it's finer in its resolution, which is also the reason why it requires more memory. When we design our players, we design them with a bitmap structure in mind. In other words, we want to have 8 bits wide and 256 lines tall, which would give us a full character. Now, you don't always plan, nor do you hardly ever use all 256 lines of the character, because what you would end up with is a tall block moving around the screen, which wouldn't define very much. But if you look at figure 2, you can see we have a spaceship, and to define that spaceship, we're going to use the values 16, 56, 56, 124, 108, and 68, which gives us that spaceship structure binarily using the 7 bits. Same as the alien below in figure 3, you can see the top of the alien, which is a 60 in decimal, which equates to bits 3, 4, 5, and 6 being turned on. Now, having these decimal numbers handy, we're going to have to write them down once we design our character, because we're going to have to transpose those into our basic program in order to load them into memory and create the character for our players. So in basic summary, we're going to create a 2K block of memory that's going to have a base. We're going to call it the PM base, and it's going to start whatever address PM base is and extend 2048 characters up and beyond that PM base. We'll reference our missiles by adding 768 to the PM base, and we will access player 1 by adding 1024 to the PM base address, and so forth. And this is going to allow us to individually poke values for player 0, player 1, player 2, player 3, and or missile 0, missile 1, missile 2, and missile 3 to define those characters. Once we have those characters defined in memory, we can set the color for them, we can control their horizontal position, and we can move them vertically within the vertical space of the screen by moving the data within the memory address space of the 256 bytes for each player. Okay, so here we are at the Atari 130XE, and I've got some code loaded here that I want to run and let everyone see what it does first. So what this code is doing is it's moving a player 0, back and forth across the screen as fast as BASIC can do it. And you can probably see a little distortion in the vertical lines as it's doing that because it's not exactly the most efficient at moving, the players back and forth, BASIC that is, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a delay in here so you can actually see it moving a little slower. And don't worry, we're going to go over this code top to bottom so that we have a good idea of what's happening. Actually, we don't have a delay in here, so let's go ahead and put a delay in here under each line. Don't worry, we're going to talk about the code. I just wanted you to see the movement a little bit slower. Okay? So the reason why I wanted you to see this before we start coding so you can get an idea in your mind what we're shooting for as far as what we're going to be looking for the code to do and what it's ultimately going to be on the screen. Now, eventually we'll turn this bar into a spaceship and I'll show you exactly how we do that. So in the meantime, let's start with lines 1 through 26. And did I forget how to do this in BASIC? Yeah, it's a comma. All right. So the first line in our code is a remark that basically says this is a player missile intro. Line 20 is a remark. The first thing we need to do when we're going to be programming in player missile graphics is we need to do what's called setting the PM base, okay? Now this base is going to be, as we talked about before, it's going to be an area in memory near the top of memory where we're going to allocate 2K of memory for our player missile graphics. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to peek into location 106. And if we look at that location here in BASIC, we see the decimal value 160. That is a page number in memory that is a multiple of 256 that tells us where the operating system thinks the top of memory is. So if we did 160 times 256, that's the actual memory address in the top of memory, okay? So what we want to do is we want to allocate 2048 bytes, which happens to be a multiple of 256 times 8, 2048. So that's why we're saying to ourselves that we want the new top of memory to be whatever it is minus 8 pages. Okay? So we're basically taking the top of memory and we're backing it up 8 pages, and that's the block of memory that we're going to use for our player missile graphics. So in order for us to designate that area of memory as ours for our player missile graphics, we need to tell the operating system, okay, guess what? The top of memory is now down here, 2K less. And that's what we're doing in line 23. We're poking back into location 106, the new top, which is the new page number of where the top of memory is. Okay, does everyone see what that's doing? Let me just highlight those two lines so that they are by themselves. Okay, We're getting the top of memory, subtracting H pages from it, and poking it back into 106. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to change our graphics mode, and I'm going to go ahead and set this to 0, because everyone knows what graphics mode 0 does. And actually, let's run that and make sure that still works the way we think it should work. And it does. Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Now, the nice thing about player missile graphics is the graphics mode is independent of the player missile graphics colors, movement, direction. They're kind of like sitting on top of the graphics mode. So you can have any one of your graphics modes below the player missile graphics, and they're independent of that, okay? All right, so now we've got our new top of memory. We've decided what graphics mode that we're going to use. Now what we need to do is we need to determine what is the address in memory for our base of our player missile graphics. So we started at the top, we backed the top of memory back down by 2K. Now we want the address of this beginning of that 2K. And the very simple, the way we do that is we take that new top number and we multiply it times 256, and that gives us what is called our player missile base graphics address. I've abbreviated here PB. So this is where we're going to be using PB throughout this demonstration to reference the beginning of our player missile graphics data. All right, so we found the new top of memory, we've changed our graphics, we've got our player missile base. Now, Atari requires you to poke location 54279 with the new top value. That is not the memory address of your base for the player missile graphics. It is that number that we poked into 106, excuse me, that tells the operating system this is where our player missile graphics is starting, page number wise. Okay, very important. A lot of people tend to put the PB number there, which is the actual address, and that's not what 54279 is looking for. Okay. Now the next location that we need to change is 559. We need to poke a 62 here for single line graphics, and I believe it's a 48 for double line graphics. This is what tells the player missile graphics system if we're using single line resolution or double line resolution. Well, obviously we're using single line resolution, so we're going to use a 62. The next poke that we need to do is location 53277. We need to poke a 3 there, and that tells the system we want to enable the player missile graphics system. Okay, again, these pokes have to be done. If you miss any one of these, the player missile graphics will not work. Let's move on down to line number 110. Poke location 623. Now I'm going to pull up a graphic here that talks about location 623. Location 623 is what gives certain players priority over other players and or missiles and or the playfield. Now that was a lot to say. Let me see if I explain that in layman's terms. Basically what you can do with player missile graphics is you can have a background, and then you can have players moving in front of that background. But you could also have different colors in the background and have players moving behind certain colors and showing in front of certain colors. So you can have a player that goes in front of trees, but behind walls. The value that we poke here in 623 is what controls that playfield priority or the player priority. You might have player 0 passing in front of player 1 or vice versa, or you might have the missiles passing in front of the players. So there's all kinds of priority you can give here for the players. We're going to go ahead and give all the players priority by poking 1 just for our sample, hitting this. Okay? So let's go on to line number 180. Now 180, I'm sorry, did we already do that? Enable player missile graphics? Yep, we've got a bug in here already, guys, but that's okay because I'm going to go ahead and fix that. It looks like I've got the enable player missile graphics in here twice, but that's no problem. We're going to get rid of 180 and we're going to get rid of 190 because that's just duplicate code. Let's run that, make sure it still works. It does. I'll explain that drawing to you in a second as to why it's doing that. Okay. Excuse me. All right, so let's go back down to, let's list lines 200 forward. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is we need to pick a color for our player 0. And the way we pick the color is we poke location 704 with the color that we want to choose for that player. I'm going to bring up a slide now where we talk about how we choose that color. Okay. Okay, so now that we've chosen our color for the player, we are going to actually set the initial X position for player 0. Now, typically, you would want to have this X position or this X position off of the screen, far enough either to the left or the right where the player is not showing. For this demonstration purpose, I've chose 120, which is somewhat in the middle of the screen, so that we can actually see the player when we run the program initially. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to set the width of player 0. And this is where we're actually going to control the width of the player. There's 3 settings you can set for players: 0 normal, 1 double, or 3 quadruple. And the designers built this capability in there for you to be able to enlarge a player in 3 stages. It's almost like magnifying the player 3 times to almost give, for example, spaceships like they did in Star Raiders. They give it the ability to make the ship look bigger as it's flying through the store field, to give you the impression that it's getting closer or you're getting closer to it. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but for right now, we're going to poke location 53256 with a 0, which stands for the normal width. Okay, let's move on to line 320. So 320 says clear player 0 memory. So as you might recall back from one of our slides, player 1, the memory location of player 1 in single line resolution starts at the player base address plus 1024. That moves us beyond the unused memory, beyond the missiles, and at the starting address for player 0 in this case. So P1, which represents our player 0, which in reality I should probably make this a P0 just to make it more compatible with what we're talking about. Actually, you know what? I'm not going to change that for right now because I don't want to break the code, but we should probably have that as a 0 just for consistency, but we're going to leave it right now. So anyway, player 1, we're going to be the player base plus 1024. Now, this is something that you really need to do for each one of your players or missiles, because remember, we've told the computer where in memory we want the player missile graphics to be designated, but we don't know what's in that memory. There could be garbage there, there could be unknown information. So it's really important that you go through the memory, clear it out, and the way you do that is you set up a loop. Now that we've got our starting address for player 1, we know that each one of our players is 256 bytes in size because we're in single line resolution graphics. So we need to loop 256 times, and we need to poke a 0 into each one of those memory address locations to clear out the garbage that's there. And the way you know that that is working, again, it's the reason why I had the player on the screen to start with. When I run this program, you'll see that. Did you see that bar go across the screen? Let's do it again. You're going to see some purple fragments in the middle of the screen, and then you'll see almost like a wiping effect going down and clearing them. Did everybody see that? Let's do that one more time. See that wiping effect right there? Okay, that's what I'm talking about. That's what this is doing. This is going through and it's clearing out the garbage that is in that player memory. This is very slow and basic. I mean, you can obviously see it happening on the screen. This is one of those routines that we're going to want to convert to assembly language and call it from basic using assembly to get that fast clearing so that it doesn't slow down the basic operation. This is one of those operations that we want to do in assembly language, machine language. And in the next episode, I'll show you how we do that, and it'll clear the player memory out instantly. Okay, but I wanted you to see that on the screen so you could see what it's doing. Now, the next thing we need to do is we need to define our player. Now, first time around, what I'm doing is I'm going through the entire player memory again, player 1 address to player 1 address plus, this should actually be 256. The second line here where I'm reading data is remarked out because what I'm doing is I'm poking directly in there 255. Okay, 255 is FF, which is a full value. And I'm cycling through and I'm filling that player with 255, which is the reason why when I run, you see on the screen clear the garbage, and then immediately see filling the player top to bottom with FF 255. Does everybody see how that worked? That's the reason why our player looks like a solid band going from the top of the screen to the bottom. Again, I did that for demonstration purposes. I wanted you to see the entire player one object filled from top to bottom and how large you could make each one of your players if need be. All right? So the next thing we're doing is once we fill the player data, then we are going to loop through 10 to 220. And now what this is going to do is this is going to move the player across the screen from left to right. This is the x-axis, the horizontal axis. So what we're doing is we're saying from 10 to 220. 10 is a location that's low enough off the screen. 220 is also a location that's off the screen. So you're going to see the player start from beyond the screen, moving across the screen, and then move off of the screen. And we've got a short delay that we just put in 1 to 10 that slows that process down. And then the way you move player 0 is you poke location 53248 with the X location you're looking for. 53248 is for player 0, 53249 player 1, and so on. There's a poke memory location for each player's X coordinate. So basically we're moving the player from 10 to 220. Once that's done, we're coming on 460 and we're moving the player from 220 back to 10 in the opposite direction. And then we're looping back to 430 where we move the player left to right, right to left, left to right, right to left. So let's see that one more time. We're wiping the garbage, we're filling in the player, and now we're moving the player left to right. Now if I break this program, you can see that the player is on the screen. And I can actually move him live right here in BASIC by poking the X value. Does everybody see that? Because this player graphic, this player is independent of the display. We can list our program here, and that player is turned on, and he is there on the screen until we turn him off. Very interesting, very cool. Player missile graphics are independent of the graphics mode that you're in. They are their own objects. They're getting controlled by the CTI or GTI chip, and it's handling the function of moving those players and those missiles around independently. Okay? So let's reset, which clears out that player and turns it off. So let's start once again from the top. We find the new top of memory by peeking 106, subtracting 8 pages from it. We poke that back into 106 to reset that top, letting the operating system know, hey, here is your new top of RAM. We set the graphics mode, whatever graphics mode we're going to be using, and we let the player missile graphics base address be that new top times 256. PB is now the address of the new player missile graphics block of 2K memory. We then poke 54279 with that new top page. We choose single line resolution by poking 559 with a 62. We enable the player missile graphics by poking 53277 with a 3. And we give all the players priority with a 623-1. We set the player for the color for player 0. That's another thing we should try. Let's try changing the color on the fly. So 704 is our color location for that player. So let's let this guy come across the screen a little bit. Let's go ahead and poke 704 with another value. Let's say 50. See the color change? And remember, this value is actually a color plus a luminance combined into one. Okay, everybody see how that works? All right, so how do we change that band to an actual rocket ship or a player object that we can actually design and use for a game? So let's go back to 390 where we're filling the player data now. Remember we talked about the player being 256 lines tall, 8 bits wide, and that's the reason why we filled the entire vertical strip of the player here with 255s so we could see the whole player in action. Well, we don't want to fill the entire player. We want the player somewhat, for our sample here, in the middle of that band. So let's start at the beginning of player 1's address, and let's add 120 to it, which will bring us down 120 lines from the top. And let's fill it to the player's address plus 134, which is roughly 14 lines in height for our player. So 120 to 134. And now I've got some player data, excuse me, already set up in some data statements below. And what we're going to do is we're going to poke those values into the player data. And let's run this and see what we get. Everybody see that now? We actually have our spaceship going across the screen. Very cool. And now you'll see them reverse, because now we're starting from the 220 location and reversing back to 10 this way. Okay? Again, we can stop the program, play around with some colors. We can continue the program. Very cool. Now we could easily set up players, we have player 0, we can set up players 1, 2, and 3, and have 4 of these spaceships going across the screen independently of each other with different colors, different speeds, different places in the vertical axis, you name it. All right? Everyone see how that works? So as you can see, with a very small amount of code, we have enabled the player missile graphics, we've turned them on, we've defined our player, we've set the graphic size. Oh, there's another thing I wanted to show you. I wanted to talk about the width of player 53256. Let's try quadrupling the size of that player, okay? So let's run it. And we're gonna break it here when he hits the middle. So I believe it was 53256. So let's poke 53256, comma 3 for quadruple. Watch what happens to our spaceship. See how big he got? See how large he did? Now we've got this quadruple size spaceship. And we didn't have to redefine any data. All we had to do was poke one location to get that to happen. Now we can do double size, poke 53256 with a 1 for double. Now we've got a double size spaceship, okay? Now if we want to move him faster, all we have to do is take out our delay or decrease our delay. Let's half our delay to 5. Okay, let's see how much faster we get now. There we go. So we got a little bit faster there. Now, the other thing I want to show you is let's remove the code where we actually clear out the memory of player 0. And this is going to show you why it's very important that you have to do this. So let's remark out this line. Let's remark out this line. And let's remark out this line. Now you're going to see we're going to end up with a character, but we also have the garbage accompanied with it. That's a perfect example of why we need to zero out the memory for each player missile object we're going to use before we actually use it, because more than likely there's going to be trash in the memory location for that object. Did everybody see that? Okay, let's put that back. Oh, let's not do that. Make sure we didn't break anything. All right. The other thing we can do too is we can change the graphics mode here. Let's do this, and let's also set the background color to black, shall we? There we go. A little more spacey. If we were savvy enough to have a star field flying in the background, that would be cool, but that's obviously going to be a more advanced subject. So anyway, guys, there you have it. Player missile graphics introduction. Very easy to set up, very easy to set up in memory, very easy to create the characters, very easy to move in horizontal directions.
Now, moving in the Y direction is a little bit more involved, but I'll show you that in the next episode. It's not too bad, and we'll also get into putting some more players on the screen and have some missiles fly across as well. And what we're doing is we're going to slowly, incrementally build towards creating our own game. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Please like, subscribe, and give me some comments below if there's anything that you want to see, or if you need anything else explained from this code. I'll be happy to comment that and explain it to you. But until the next episode, keep programming. Go Atari. All right, so there you have it. Introduction to player missile graphics, and we actually got some code working in Atari Basic. So if you like this video, make sure you let me know. Make sure you like, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Give me some comments down below. Let me know what you like, what you don't like, if you want me to continue this series. I think most people want to see this type of programming on this channel. Probably more so assembly than basic, but basic is a good starting point to get your feet wet and to learn the technology, and then just move that logic over to assembly language for speed and power. And that's kind of how I work it here. So anyway, I'll see you in the next video where we progress with this sample. I'm going to add some more code to it and get some backgrounds drawn in there, and we'll make our spaceship, you know, move up and down and be controlled by the joystick, and we're going to build upon it that way. So until the next video, keep programming. Go Atari. What's up, guys? We're back with part 2, player missile graphics on the Atari. We're going to do some good stuff today. We're going to advance the topic, so stick around. Don't go anywhere. So in this episode, part 2 of learning player missile graphics sprites on the Atari, we're going to build upon what we started with in the first video, which, by the way, if you haven't watched the first video, I highly recommend you click the link and go check it out, because it's the foundation for what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to take the spaceship that we created in the last example, or the last video. We're going to rotate him a little bit so that he's facing up and down vertically, and then we're going to expand upon moving the sprite vertically in memory on the screen. And we're going to show you how to do that 2 ways. The first way is going to be done in BASIC, and you're going to see it's very slow. And the second way is I'm going to give you a couple assembly language or machine language routines that it's going to allow you to move your sprites or your players' missiles vertically very quickly in machine language. We're also going to talk about reading the joystick, and we're going to allow the joystick to control the spaceship going horizontally and also vertically. And then we're going to add a playfield, a background, some different colors, and we're going to see our player or our sprite move in front of and behind those playfield objects, okay? We're also going to give you a little machine language routine for clearing the sprites in memory when you first start the program or when you start your routine. As you could see last week, it was doing it in BASIC was very slow, poking those locations with zeros. I'm going to give you a small machine language routine that will do that very quickly in machine language. So let's get into it. I think you're going to like this. We're going to get our program doing some really cool stuff, and let's get started. All right, let's get into some coding, shall we? So I've got the original program here that we talked about in the first video, and let's just take a quick look at what it does. You can see that it clears the trash from player 1, and it moves that player horizontally across the screen to the right, to the left, to the right, to the left in a complete loop. So just as a quick review, what we did was we found our new top of memory with peak 106. We subtracted 8 pages of 256-page memory, and we created a new top based on poking that value back into 106. We set our graphics mode. We let our player base of our player missile graphics equal to that new top times 256. We poke that into 54279, which tells the system where our new top is and where we're going to start our player missile graphics. We set up our single line resolution. We enable player missile graphics, poking 532773. Again, this is all setting up the basics. We set player zero's color.
We set the initial X position. We set the width to normal. We clear out the player data here. We're basically looping through player 1 in memory, plus 120. Now player 1's memory location starts at the top of the screen, way up here. And if we add 120, we basically start right at the top of the screen here. Okay, so then we're filling from 120 all the way to 134 of his data. Actually, I take that back. Let's look at that one more time. Let's clear the screen. We're clearing the data here by taking the base of the player missile graphics plus 1024. If you remember, 1024 in single line resolution, that's where our first player starts in memory. So the base address plus 1024, we're looping 256 times and poking it with 0. That's that clearing effect that you see when you run the program. You see that trash that gets cleared off the screen? That's how slow it is. That's one of the things we're going to improve in the next version. We're actually going to replace this code right here, line 330, 40, 50, and 60, with a small machine language routine. And we're going to pass it the location in memory where player 1 lives, and it'll go through and fill that memory quickly with zeros. So that's one of the things we're going to talk about today in improving with machine language. We came down here, we fill the player data with our spaceship, which is basically 120 through 134 in that whole 256 bytes of memory for that player. We're reading that data from some data statements that are later on in the program where we're poking them into memory. And then what we're doing is we're doing a loop here that basically moves the player from the 10 to the 220 on the x-axis. So 10 is just off the screen and 220 is just off the screen to the right. And then we're starting again from 220 back to 10. So it's basically moving the ship to the right and then to the left. So that's that program. If you need to look at the previous video to get a more detailed explanation of how that program works, there's a link that I'll include right now in the video. In case you missed it in the beginning, just click on it. It'll take you to the first video in this series where you can actually catch up on where we're at for today's episode. So let's type new and let's enter into the second version that I call Player 1B. And this is the more updated version of the program that we're going to look at today. So that's going to go ahead and load from our 5 1/4 or 1050 disk drive. And then we're going to take a look at the similarities. The first part of the code is going to be pretty much the same as the other one. Now I want you to ignore these first two lines here. There's a go sub to 7500 where I'm initializing some machine language strings, but we're going to talk about that in a second. So let's ignore that just for now. But as you can see, at the beginning of the part of the program, it's pretty much the same. Vertical position, horizontal starting position. Actually, one thing I did in this version here is I set up some variables. And the variables that I set up were vpos p1, which stands for vertical position of player 1, 120. This is going to track our vertical position of our player. And then I've got hpos p1, which is the horizontal position of player 1. This is going to track the horizontal position of the player. And then I've got the height of player 1, which is 6, meaning 6 bytes. And I decided to put these as variables so that we can make quick changes without having to go through the program and make a bunch of changes all over the place wherever the vpos is used or the h position is used or the height is used. Okay, we're setting our base here like we did before. We're poking that. We're setting the new top of memory here by poking that into 106. We're changing the graphics mode here. I'm gonna basically we're gonna ignore this go sub right now. I've got it commented out right now. This go sub here is gonna draw the background. It's going to draw some colorful stripes as our background, but we're not going to talk about that just yet. We'll leave that towards the end. We're getting the player base here, which is the new top of memory times 256, and we're poking that into as the new top for our player missile graphics, and so on and so on and so on. I don't want to waste a bunch of time going over this when we've talked about each one of these lines in the original program. So let's go down to line number 450. Okay, if you remember in the other program, we were clearing the player data
with basic statements. We were basically looping through the beginning of player 1 in memory, and we were poking zeros from 0 to 256 to clear out the entire height of that player, but using basic. What I've done here is I've got, and if you don't understand this syntax here of how to call machine language from Atari Basic using a string, I'm going to include a link right now above that talks about how I'm using machine language in BASIC using a string. So make sure you check that video out and it'll explain what we're doing here. So basically, I'm setting player 1, the address in memory of player 1 as the player missile base, which is the base in memory where our player missile graphics have been established, plus 1024. And what I'm doing is I'm saying x, any variable you want, equals user routine, USR. This is how you call machine language from BASIC. And I'm saying run the routine that is at the address of this memclr string. Now, memclr string I have defined later on in the program as a string of ASCII characters. Each byte of that string represents a machine language mnemonic or / operand. So let's go down towards the end of the program where that's defined, which is 7500. Okay, let's get rid of this for now so we can just focus on this. Okay, so this line here, 7500, is just a remark that says this is the machine language clear player missile in memory. This is also a line here that's commented, and the reason why this line is here is I included that in all of my programs where I'm calling machine language to remind the user how to call the machine language routine. So for example, we're going to call the address of the memclr string, which is the address of memory where the machine language program is, and we're passing it, the first variable is the base of the player missile graphics times 256, and the size of the area that we're going to be clearing, which is 2048 bytes. So this is going to clear out the entire area, if you will, of the player missile graphics, because as we know in single line resolution, it's 2K, 2048 bytes. So if you wanted to clear out the entire player missile graphics area and zero it out, this is how you would do it. This down here is the actual machine language code, memclr string, dimensioned to 36 characters, and then we assign it these bunch of characters. Now, again, I'm not going to go into detail in this video on how I came up with these characters and what these characters, how they represent the machine language code. But for this video, we're going to assume that these characters represent a small machine language routine that we can call and it will do something for us. Okay? And that's why I have at the beginning of our program here a Go Sub 7500 right here, because before we do anything, I'm initializing the machine language routines so we have them in memory. Does everybody understand that? Okay. So let's go back where we were clearing the memory for player 1. So basically now what we're doing is instead of using basic, we're calling this machine language routine. We're calling the address of the memclear routine. We're passing it player 1's starting address in memory, which we know is the base of our player missile graphics plus 1024 bytes. And if you remember, I'll put the graphic up, the slide up right now. In single line resolution, player 1, his address starts at the player missile graphics base address plus 1024. So that's why we're doing P1 here. So we know where in memory to start clearing the memory for player 1. And of course, in single line resolution graphics, 256 bytes is the size of each player or each sprite. Each sprite is 256 bytes. So what this is doing is it's going to the memory where player 1 is located or sprite 1 is located, and it's clearing it out. And you're going to see when we run this program, you won't even see that swiping effect on the screen. It's just instantly black. It clears the player out without even being able to see it. So that's the first improvement we made to the program, is that we actually have machine language clearing out our players. Okay, so now let's continue. After that, as we did before, we're filling the player data with read data statements. So we're going for y equals player 1 plus the initial position, which we know is to be 120, to the player 1 plus his initial position plus the height of him minus 1, since we're zero-based index,
So that's basically going to fill just the spaceship portion of the entire player with the pixels that we're including in our data statements to fill that spaceship, okay? Now, what I've done, and I'm going to show you a slide here right now, the original spaceship looked like this. It was oriented to the right, with the tip facing right and the rear of the ship facing left, okay? What I did was I changed the orientation of the ship a little bit. I rotated him 90 degrees counterclockwise, which obviously changed the byte data. And you can see here the new byte data that we have for the new spaceship. So what I did was I modified the data statements in our program here to reflect the new spaceship data, if you will, or bytes in memory. And we can go down here, I'll show you in the code. This here, as you can see, 24, 60, 60, 126, 255, 60, that is the new byte structure for our new ship. Okay, so our new ship is oriented up instead of sideways. So that was another change that I made here. We're still filling the data with BASIC here. We're reading the value, we're poking it in memory, and we're looping back. So that hasn't changed. The only thing that changed was our orientation of our ship. The next thing we're doing here is we're poking 53248. This is the initial exposition, if you will, of our spaceship. I could have used the horizontal position variable, which we'll change that in a minute. Well, actually, you know what? Let's actually do that right now since we have it. As we can see here, H position I have, H position P1 is 120, so we may as well go ahead and use that variable. H position P1. So let's go here and make that H position P1. This will give it the initial position on the screen. All right? So, now what we were doing in the old program is after we set that initial position, we were looping through and we were basically moving the spaceship to the right and to the left through a loop, and we were doing it in code with this poke 53248, okay? Now, what we're doing differently here in this program is we're reading the joystick. Okay, let me show you that code. So basically right here is our what I'm calling the main loop, because this program is going to basically go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and go right back up to 640. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to basically loop and loop and loop and look for the joystick movement, and based on the joystick movement, it's going to move the player to the left, to the right, up, or down. All right? So basically, the way you read the joystick in BASIC is with the stick keyword. And the stick keyword, you pass it a parameter of the joystick that you want to read, 0-based index. So stick 0 is going to be physically joystick on port number 1. That's going to return a value. And let me bring up a slide. This slide here is going to show you the values that are returned from the stick command. And in decimal, you can also see in binary the representation of the numbers that represent up, down, left, right, diagonal left, diagonal right, diagonal down left, diagonal down right. Okay? So back in our code, we're only, for this demonstration, we're only concerned with left, right, up, and down. Those are the only movements we're going to worry about at this point. So 14 is going to equal up, 13 is down, 11 is left, and 7 is right. So if we go up, then we're going to call go sub 730. And if we look at 730, we're going to see here that basically we have a machine language routine here. Move player up machine language. Now this is another machine language routine that I've incorporated into this program. It's stored into a string, mvpl upstring, and what you do is you pass it the player 1 in memory, his starting address, plus his current vertical position, where he's at currently right now. This is why we have to track with the variable where we are. And then the second parameter is the height of the player 1, so that's going to be height P1. So this routine is going to move the player up 1 pixel on the screen. Once that comes back successfully, we're going to take the vertical position and assign it to whatever the vertical position is minus 1. We must keep track in our program where we are, so that the next time we call move player, we can tell it exactly where we are now at the new location. Let me expand this out a little bit, because there's two versions of this move command that I want to show you. Okay, and we're going to start off with the basic one. So lines 730, 740, 760, 770. That
right there, these lines right here are the machine language version. That's the fast version. I also have another version which happens on lines 771 through 840. And you can see there's a little bit more code in here. But what it's doing is we're manipulating memory in BASIC here. We're basically looping through the height of player 1, okay, which is 6 bytes. And we're poking in memory the new position of player 1, comma, the old position of player 1. So what we're doing is line by line, we're taking the bottom of the ship. Let's say we're moving the ship up. Let's say we're moving the ship up. We're taking the top of the ship and we're moving that byte up 1. And then we're taking the second line of the ship and moving that 1 byte, 1 line up. So we're basically moving each byte 1 line up at a time. But as you'll see in BASIC, it's very slow, okay? So what I actually want to do is, we know that our BASIC version here is starting at 771. So let's make sure that our joystick up location goes to 771, because I want you to see the slowness in BASIC first before we look at the machine language version. So let's change this to 771. Now we know that if the joystick comes back with a 13, that means down. So let's look at 844.